Hello, welcome to the Week in Review. As our regular viewers well know, we take a deep dive into some of the top stories of the week just ended. I am Mohamed Mbouch, and today we'll be examining stories that made the waves both in the Gambia and around the world, from efforts to honor the victims of the April 10th, 11th demonstrations to the alarming rise in global child malnutrition due to funding cuts. We have much to unpack. And we'll also discuss the ongoing legal proceedings of an alleged former member of Jammeh's Junglers, the Death Squad. And we'll also take a look at the critical updates on the demolition of so-called illegal structures in Salaji layout. And we have much more. And here to help me unpack the stories is my colleague, Mr. Usman Jatta. Welcome to the Week in Review.
Thanks for having me on the program once again, Mr. Mbouch.
Yeah, welcome. Now let's dive in. 25 years after the tragic April 10th, 11th student demonstrations that shook the Gambia, two local organizations, Fantanka and the Dord Bender Group, have planted 15 trees along Tobacco Road in Banjul to honor the lives lost. Let's just take a look at this clip.
Each tree would be planted and named after a victim of the April 10th and 11th. So after the tree planting exercise, the trees are expected to be tagged. That way, especially the young generation would know that in April 10, 11, a tragic massacre happened. And such is not expected to happen ever again in the Gambia.
Let us never forget, let us say their names, and let us continue to fight for a Gambia where young people can raise their voices without fear and violence or death.
That's it. Mr. Jatta, we heard from our Dacosta, who is the Programs and Outreach Coordinator from Fantanka, and Marlon Jabate, Country Director of Fantanka. Extraordinary. I was going to ask you, where were you on April 10th, 2000? But again, if I take 25 years from your life, you must have been very, very young. Growing up, what did April 10th mean to you?
Indeed, like you rightly said, I was a very young child at the time. Actually, I couldn't tell a lot about the event, but as I grow older, I get to hear a lot about the incident, how the students, were seriously massacred to some extent, as a result of trying to show solidarity with one of their colleagues who was seriously dealt with to some extent. So I think it's important that
actually, there was one person, Ibrahim Barry, who died, in the hands of fire department, it was said, and there was another girl, a 13-year-old girl, who was raped. So it was like a march for justice, wasn't it?
Indeed, they were showing solidarity to their colleague, which was something that is actually their right to some extent. But looking at the nature of the government at the time, it would be very challenging for someone to, or for a group of people to go out and, to show solidarity, for their colleagues. So, but I think above all, it's important that history is revisited, to show more solidarity with the victims to some extent, and also to talk about some of the challenges, that some survivors are facing at the moment.
Absolutely. So it's important here we talk about how effective do you think these symbolic acts are of preserving national memory and promoting healing?
Indeed, it shows that people concerned, the public is concerned about the incident, and they are still, showing solidarity with the affected victims, and equally as well, it will help people to recall, more especially the younger generation, because these people are planting trees, and on each tree, they would attach a name, and a picture of
15 people died.
Yes,
that's why they're planting 15 trees.
Of the people that passed away.
Including 12 students.
Yes, so it will really help to serve as a reminder for the younger generation, and it will show people that there is a need to be careful of certain actions, and equally as well to demonstrate that security personnel and state instruments should not be used in the wrong way to force people into illegal or uncivilized to some extent, actually.
Do you think we need a more formal memorial, if you like, of the day?
Indeed, that is important. Imagine, like, if the government is to embark on that to some extent, it carries more weight, it shows more solidarity and more seriousness and commitment from the side of the government, to show that, this was done by the state to some extent, state security personnel to some extent, and we are showing solidarity, and, we are showing you that, we are going to take steps, to also respond to the survivors who are still facing medical challenges, because we have seen one who was sitting on a wheelchair, who was a victim of it. And in his interview, he said he wanted to become a lawyer, but as a result of the incident, he did not complete his schooling, and now, history is just something else for him.
So many lives cut short. Yes. People who died, and then those who sustained life-changing injuries, for instance. It just derailed their whole...
So that is why it's important that the government should take up the matter to some extent, because we've seen the National Assembly member for Banjul North calling for more compensation for the victims, more especially the ones that need medical treatment and, education-wise, because a lot of people lost, they could have been something else, today, they could have been lawyers like the other guy claimed, and meaningful people in the society, but as a result of such tragic incident, their life became something else.
Absolutely. The compensation is one bit, and the other bit, the perpetrators, non-prosecuted so far, no accountability so far after 25 years.
Indeed, it is important to also deal with that matter. Like we have seen in the case of the TRRC, now we are seeing new developments which we will discuss later. But I think it's important that that is also addressed. But that can only happen if the government comes in to some extent, the broader picture that we are talking about. If the government chips in, it means, they are not only willing to show solidarity, but they are willing to go further to make sure that, compensation happens, to make sure that justice, is served to the highest level to some extent.
That's it. But here I'm also wondering, I wonder how the protests in 2000 really shaped sort of youth activism and civil engagement. Do you think it had any long-term impact on how people protest or how we engage with authorities? What do you think?
Indeed, yeah, because the ones that have witnessed it have seen the tragedy of how the tragedy occurred, and they're very mindful to some extent, and we have seen a lot of youth activism to some extent. We have the National Youth Council, standing up for the youth, and other youth groups and activities, civil society, all geared towards making sure that the voices of youth are promoted and their rights are also equally preserved to some extent. So I think it has a lot of lessons inculcated in it, and the country has a lot to learn from it to some extent.
That's it. Yeah. Thank you very much there, Usman. Now to our next story. We'll spotlight a deepening global crisis with heartbreaking consequences, one that threatens the lives and futures of millions of children. UNICEF has sounded the alarm. Let's just listen to this.
The situation in the Gambia further illustrates the devastating effects of malnutrition. Many children, especially those in rural areas, remain undernourished despite ongoing efforts. UNICEF continues to support the government of the Gambia in improving nutrition outcomes through integrated nutrition strategies in primary healthcare services. As a result, exclusive breastfeeding has increased from 47% to 54%. Childhood malnutrition and stunting have decreased from 25% to 18%. Wasting has been reduced from 9% to 5%. And underweight prevalence has fallen from 15% to 12%.
Mr. Jatta, recent funding cuts, particularly in the US, and then afterwards even with European countries now having to boost their defense spending. They've been cutting the aid budget for that. And places like Africa and some places in Asia, I'm sure South America as well, so much really depended on this aid. So now everybody's running helter-skelter, as it were, not knowing what to do. What an extraordinary chaos unleashed, and a lot of kids will be suffering. People are dying in many areas, and look at it here, some 14 million children around the world malnourished.
Indeed, the world is experiencing a major shift, in the way it operates, and I think this is very alarming to some extent. We have witnessed, we are already witnessing a lot of crises, globally, like the Ukraine-Russia war, the Palestine and Israel, conflict to some extent, and in all of these crises, you have vulnerable people, mostly women and children, to some extent. So I think it is important that, and like you said as well, like it sends a signal, like the high dependency rate of countries on other countries, like mostly like Western countries to some extent. So I think, we should learn a huge lesson from these aid cuts to some extent, because it has major implications on women and children more especially, and whenever there are cuts now, if the fundings have been stopped to some extent, what would happen is people like refugees to some extent may not have access to basic services, and that means, they would have to pull out from their pockets, to have access to some of these services. And most of them, they are not in a position as a result of the crisis. So it has a very significant impact on the lives of children. And I think the report to some extent, it could rely on what is happening on the ground in most of these countries.
In fact, one journalist called it a kind of death sentence on so many different people, really, because of all of the programs that were being sponsored from these donors, from the aid. But here, of course, our next question will be what governments are doing, how they are reacting to these cuts, so that we can stop a full-blown nutritional crisis.
Indeed, it's an alarming thing, and it's a serious warning for every serious government to some extent, and Africa as a continent in general. I think every government should respond to it, and I think the best way to respond to it is to work on improving your national production to some extent, because you cannot rely fully on Western aid to some extent. If there are cuts, automatically it's going to affect. So working on the national production base, making sure that you invest a lot in agriculture, is something that is viable. We have seen most African countries now, they are doing that. Like even the other time I saw Senegal, they have partially closed the importation of onions to some extent, just to promote local production. So it's like most of the African countries are beginning to learn from some of these crises, and I think it's important that every other country follows the same step to make sure that at least a balanced condition or environment is created to some extent.
Of course, in the case of the Gambia, as our reporter, as the Barry said, we've been making improvements in stunting and malnutrition and all the like. So now the fear is, hope that such gains wouldn't be rolled back because of the cut in funds, and we are not doing much really to generate, as it were, more money to put into it. So that's really the fear.
Indeed, like one could say, the value change would be affected to some extent, because already the funding was available, so the distribution was going very well, and all of a sudden, if the cuts, the funding cuts come in, it's going to be it's something else. So, but like I said earlier, what the government could do, they could now look at the budget, create a spatial, at least like a portion that would look into such areas, to make sure that they create a balance to some extent. Because if you just leave it like that, it's going to be very vague. Because I noticed in our last budget, the funding coming from international partners made it to go a little bit high, because most people were thinking that it was all within the domestic, coming from the domestic sectors, but like it was made clear that like some of the expenditures were coming from like donors to some extent. So the moment those, there is a cut in funding, it's seriously going to affect the budget. So that means, the government has to create a balance to make sure that this is well counted to some extent.
That's it. So you're right. So now government must take action.
Indeed.
To assuage, at least to be a kind of buffer, on the worst sort of possible consequences, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you very much there, Usman. Now, let's turn our attention to a story stirring strong reactions across the country. The Department of Physical Planning, in collaboration with the Ministry of Information, has updated the public on the demolition of what it describes as illegal structures in Sukuta Salaji layout. Let's just listen to this one.
Encroachments within the Salaji layouts have been a great challenge for the Ministry of Lands and Regional Government for quite a while now. Both the public spaces created serve as amenities and services within the layout, and the residential plots already allocated by government have not been spared. Public spaces reserved for specific purposes were demarcated by individuals and sold as residential plots. Access roads were blocked.
That was the Modu Tal, DPS, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Admin, Ministry of Lands. Yeah. Now imagine that. So here the difficult bit is, where do legal enforcement and stop, or where they collide with human impact? Isn't it quite interesting there? And as he said, it's been a problem for a while now. So they've had to resort to these extreme measures.
Yes.
What do you make of it?
It shows the challenges around, the access to land in the country, the growing challenge, Over the years, we have seen a trend in this country, where people find it very difficult to have access to land, not only land, but reliable, because imagine somebody telling you, I've got papers from the Department of Physical Planning, but still my house has been demolished to some extent. So there is a lot happening in the background, and there's a need to respond to it, to create proper structures in place and policies that will guide the access to land in the country to some extent. Because most people are left homeless now, wondering where to head to, because even if you have the money now to build a house, it may take time. When will you settle down? So it's a bit challenging and critical to some extent at this moment.
Well, what you've said there is very interesting. Some of them, you said, can show you papers from the Department of Physical Planning,
sure,
that everything is kosher, everything is legal. So, but again, afterwards, they come to realize that it wasn't. So should the Department of Physical Planning take part of the responsibility?
One may argue to some extent, because one could have argued that they could have engaged them, despite the fact that they indicated in their report that they did summon them or notice them about the demolition, or for them to move from the area to some extent. But I think it would have been also important to engage them in a session where they would all sit there, discuss on a way out, because they did mention about their right of compensation. So I think if all of that is in concern, there is a need to sit with them before engaging in a demolition. That way around, they could have been much prepared to some extent for the demolition. But just like that, some people feel like they were just, abruptly, informed, and just the demolition, embarked on demolition to some extent.
But some people can say that why compensation? They were not supposed to build there in the first place. If that place where they built, if it had been legitimate, yes, then you would be eligible for compensation. But you shouldn't have done so in the first place.
Indeed, that is right. But there are policies that guide, that empowers every citizen, or to be compensated in such situations.
Well, it depends on the situation,
yes,
isn't it?
Sure.
If it had been a legal structure, yes, but if it is illegal, why should you be compensated?
So that is the case. So as we speak, some are already being compensated. That is the ones that there is a specific, because there are two areas. They have got a residential layout, and the other one is a non-residential layout. But the affected victims, according to the officials from the Ministry of Lands and Physical Department as well, they did mention that they are settling them. There is a name for the Kabilo, actually I couldn't recall, but they are still compensating them. But it's a very critical matter as we speak, because when people come out with their physical documents from physical planning, it becomes something else. And some will tell you, how can I be paying tax? How can I have access to electricity, water, while I still I am still affected by the demolition to some extent. So it's a bit challenging. But one may say they may resort to like legal challenges to some extent. To
yes. The legal recourse they have in this, the affected residents. So it will be interesting to see whether anyone would
indeed, because if you have the documents to some extent, you can always, file a legal challenge, and eventually, the court will decide whether you were wrongly, affected or not.
That's it. And there's also the wider issue of urban development and planning. People building structures where they shouldn't, and that affects all sorts of things, including waterways, as it were. So it's a very tough job.
I think what the government can do in that area is anywhere that is designated for like government reserve lands, let them create proper markings, proper demarcations to indicate that, signboards to indicate that no one should build in this area. That way around, anyone that settles in that area, you know that you are putting yourself in a mess to some extent. There are people, it's not only in Salaji, Sukuta Salaji, we are talking about other areas like Tanje, like Sotokoi, all of these places have government layouts, and in the TDA as well, people are building massively, and some of them would just engage like locals, and they would build like that. So I think it's important, if you're investing your money into such an asset, there is a need to think critically out of the box, to know who you are buying the land from and which area you are targeting as well. It's important.
Absolutely. But again, if people tell you, just as you made the point earlier, if people tell you that, well, these dimensions and the location where it is, that was agreed by staff from the Department of Physical Planning. Everything looks okay. How do you deal with that?
I think it's not only a question of like acquiring the documents from physical planning, because like you may get the documents to some extent.
But isn't that the most tangible evidence for?
But how did you get the documents? At times it's the question. I can sit in my house and get a driving license to some extent without going out, through the necessary process. So this is another problem in this country. People acquire documents without, following the right procedure, But I believe if you follow the right procedures to some extent, you can challenge this anywhere, really.
Okay. Thank you very much there, Usman. Now to our next story. Into a landmark trial that is making waves not just in the Gambia but across the international community. Michael Sankoria, an alleged former member of Jammeh's death squad, what we call the Junglers, is finally stood trial in the United States.
Michael Correa's trial was originally scheduled to start on September 16, 2024. However, on September 11, the presiding judge postponed the trial until this year, following a defense motion seeking delay to slow the defense to take depositions from 2 witnesses in the Gambia. The trial, the third of its kind in the United States, is part of ever-increasing efforts to use universal jurisdiction to ensure that victims of the most heinous crimes, including those committed under President Yahya Jammeh's rule, have additional pathways to justice.
Mr. Yatta, this is the third case of its kind in the U.S., so this is sort of new territory around the world in many ways. Universal jurisdiction.
Yeah.
What do you make of this, Michael Sankoria?
Indeed, it shows that justice shall ever come. It is inevitable to some extent. No matter how well you run, you must face justice eventually. One may claim even you did not face it in the world. When you go to the other side of the equation, you would face it there. So it's very important. And as far as universal jurisdiction is concerned, the moment it does not matter in which country you committed a crime. As far as you committed a crime, you can always be tried, and investigated to some extent. So it's important, and it also means a lot to the victim community, to their healing, and because in this world, human beings, like I told you the other time, man by nature is a political animal, as stated by the Greek philosopher. So at times we feel satisfied when we see that, justice is served, we have access to basic, services and so forth. So it's very important. I think it's a crucial move to some extent, but as far as justice is concerned, it's always an argument, and whoever makes the valued arguments, becomes the winner. So
yes, the long arm, as they call it, of the law.
Sure.
Do you think that because of this provision called universal jurisdiction, that could be a deterrent on people and people's behavior, even though within your national borders, whatever you do, there are certain limits, certain thresholds. If you go beyond them internationally, you could be tried anywhere. Do you think that could be a deterrent?
It is arguable to some extent, like, and that is for conscious people, people who understand law, people who are conscious of the law to some extent, would be very careful that, you know, with such policies in place, with the universal jurisdiction, I may become a victim, you know, and I think that is important to some extent because it will help people to be conscious of, you know, their actions to some extent. Currently we are witnessing the commission of inquiry for the councils, you know, and people have learned a lot of lessons from it. That you know when you are serving in public offices, you know, or public spaces, you know, there is a need to be careful because eventually, even if you are not audited today, tomorrow you may find yourself in such a commission. So it's important, it's very, very important. And I think, you know, if it is encouraged to some extent, you know, it will really serve as a deterrent, as you said.
That's it. We've of course seen the example of bylaw in Germany, and Sonko as well in Switzerland. Now we've got Michael Correa. I'm sure somebody might say that, look at it, outside the Gambia, there are persecutions taking place, but in the country where it happened, still no prosecutions at all, really, perhaps, apart from Yankuba Toure in many ways. Well, how would you respond to that view?
Indeed, quite right. One may argue that maybe the government is not committed. It's an argument, though. It's not committed to some extent. But it's important for them to understand that, you know, you don't just embark on such activities like that. You have to set a clear ground. You know, you need to come up with like instruments, the right policies in place to make sure that you're able to try, you know, such individuals. Now, let's look at the case of the former president. You know, most people talk about like taking him to, you know, taking him to face justice to some extent. But in order for him to face justice, there's a need for the country to create a hybrid court. You know, none of our courts, you know, can take the matter. So that hybrid court involves a lot of resources, you know, and the country to some extent may rely on the help of donors, like to set up that hybrid court. So if we are to use our own resources, you know, there's a need to create balance, and we have got problems, you know, that we are still, you know, trying to solve, you know, around. So it's important for the public to understand it in that way to some extent.
How would you respond to the argument that it's been slow?
That is it, actually. You know, Rome was not built in one day. You know, it requires a lot of like a commitment and also like action, like to set up such systems like I just said. So it may take time it may look like something slow, but eventually, you know, without those systems, you cannot just embark on them like that. Just recently, we have seen the appointment and swearing in of the newly appointed commissioners for the Victims Reparations Commission.
That's going to be our next story.
Indeed.
You've mentioned it now. Let's go straight into it. This historic moment, really, in our journey towards justice and healing. The President has officially sworn in members of the newly formed Reparations Commission, marking a pivotal step in addressing the long-standing grievances of those affected. Let's just listen to this.
I, Dr. Badara Loum, having been appointed as chairperson of the Office of the Reparation Commission, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to the Republic of the Gambia according to the law.
That's it. There, Dr. Badara Loum, highly experienced man there, as the chairperson of this new commission. How important is this commission, this Reparations Commission, in the broader transitional justice scheme, as it were?
Indeed, it's like the epicenter of the transitional justice of the country, because now the commission is responsible for the healing process, the entire reparation, you know, making sure that, you know, every victim, is, well compensated. Their problems are being responded to. There are a lot of victims who are facing access to health challenges, education and so forth. So this commission would help in that. It will help to make sure that, it responds to the challenges of every victim to some extent, because, we have seen the TRRC and, we have seen a lot of revelations, from witnesses and, people coming with different stories. So, it will now take in, it's part of the recommendations of the TRRC. That one of the recommendations was to establish a victims reparations commission that would look into the matters of victims, how to compensate them, how to, make sure that, they are well, assisted in society to some extent. So it's going to run for 5 years, and within the 5 years, it would really work on its mandate. It's an independent body, which is independent, totally free from interference from the government. And we have seen the government has shown, or the president to some extent has shown commitment that, his government would stand for them to make sure that, they provide funding for them to some extent, and equally as well mobilize international, funding from the international level to some extent.
So here they'll need to balance,
yes, the equation,
compensation, emotional healing,
psychosocial support,
and even accountability. Quite a task.
And interesting, when I engaged the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General, he did mention that there's a lot happening, like the assets of the president with the residence which was sold in America, in millions of dollars actually, would all be used as part of the funds for the reparations commissions, which is very interesting actually.
Absolutely, and that's just one part of it, because in the TRRC report, there were 265 actions that the government accepted. You need to, take these actions, and that's just one of them, isn't it?
It's really broad, but I think it's important that the government, is putting focus on the reparations, because, the prioritization matters a lot. Imagine if you implement or you take action on some of those recommendations without reparations, some may still feel like, they are not sorted out. So reparations, I think it's a very good start for the government. Then from there, along the way, probably even within the 5 years, they could be implementing other, recommendations of the commission. But for me personally, I think the reparations is one of the most important recommendations of the commission.
That's it, and how much it is compensated or how it's worked out is going to be highly contentious.
Indeed.
Thank you very much there. We've reached the halfway point, so we'll just take a short break.
The future is now with QCell's 5G network. Experience speeds like never before with our new 5G Rocket Fixed Internet plan. Get speeds from 10 Mbps to 100 Mbps. Your 5G-enabled devices. Walk into QCell headquarters to get one of our 5G routers and experience the true feeling of 5G. Only with QCell. QCell brings you the future. Tech, innovation, incredible speed. The future is now. For more information, call our customer care on 111. QCell, Sunyapus. We innovate, others follow. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello, welcome back to the Week in Review. I'm Mohammed Butch, and to help me go through some of the headline stories of the week ended is Mr. Usman Jatta. Now, we turn our attention to the upcoming by-election for Halfdai Ward, where Bartholomew Bolo Koli, the NPP candidate, has expressed strong confidence in securing victory. Let's just listen to him.
Coming here and then seeing a lot of people coming with you is something very great. And I think it shows that they really want me as their candidate. And that's what's giving me strength each day, definitely.
Why should they vote for you?
Because they know that I'm the competent candidate for them. I'm the very competent candidate for them. I live with them in Halfdai, and I know their problems.
Yes, with Mr. Koli, they are very, very confident, but they all sound confident, don't they, in the beginning? Quite an interesting by-election coming up.
Indeed, it's interesting, and for the fact that it involves the National People's Party of the president to some extent, and it's always a test of time for them because, like the president would say, his party is a young party. So, how people respond towards the election, the by-election, tells a lot about the future of, his party to some extent. But I think it's also important, the question that a reporter asks, why do he think people should vote for him? I think most of the politicians, don't answer these questions right. They don't even understand the issues that people, are going through. And I think it's important to understand the issues first before you can delve into the matter. But gradually, I think, generally speaking, I think it's going to be a very competitive election, and it's really going to be a test of time for the National People's Party, NPP.
Yes, it is. He's called himself, that he's been a youth activist, wasn't he? So here one wonders how these youth leaders like Mr. Kuli there can shape the future of local governance.
Indeed,
in the country.
It would help to some extent, because if you're dealing with youth, if you're involved into activities that are concerned with like a community, enhancement to some extent, already you're visible to the people, and one could say, if you hold, higher positions, you could do more for the people. So, but, it's also important to understand the issues, like I said. The issues not only within Halfdan, not only within Banjul, but Gambia in general. How is the country going? How is the government responding? All of these things would also determine how people vote for them. Is also important. And eventually, that is why, when elections happen, some people are surprised. They are like, how come, I lose in such a place? But, you don't consider the external factors as well. So it's also important to consider all of those forces, as far as, the election is concerned, like the state of, current state of living and other stuff, the party itself, because it belongs to the president to some extent. So a lot of things would happen. People will think along the line. They will try to think along outside of the box, a lot of things. So, but all in all, I think it's a very crucial election, and time will tell eventually.
That's the reason why we're having this by-election is that the councillor just sort of disappeared, didn't he? I wonder how that might impact voter sentiment and the expectations. The fact that that councillor just left, as it were, so now they're having this by-election. How do you think the whole circumstances would affect voters?
Indeed, it would have an impact on it. In every election, we always know there is always like that voter apathy. Like some people will decide not to take part in the election, not to vote, because of their personal reasons also. So I think it would have an impact on that to some extent. Some may decide to sit, on the fence, not to take part in it, but I think generally it does not make much difference as well as far as, election is concerned, because, at the end of the day, it comes down to the community. It comes down to the people. The people, the decisions they make would affect them. So they know the issues they are facing with. Most likely, they would come out to vote for those issues, not for the people that they are contesting for the elections. Actually,
that's it. So this is an interesting one. Everybody would be looking to see which way it will go, isn't it? Because sometimes voters use these by-elections or local government to punish, as it were, central government. Sure. So it will be interesting to see which way it goes in Banjul. Of course, a ward is very small, but still.
We have seen in Kiang, it was a different thing. It was a competition. So in Banjul as well, that is why I said it's going to be a test of time for the NPP, and you just mentioned the entire administration as well, because it's a yardstick, like it's like a survey sort of. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much there, Mr. Jata. Now we turn our focus to a crucial development in the Gambia's digital economy. The Gambia Competition and Consumer Protection Commission hosted a forum with business stakeholders to validate its newly released digital markets report. Let's just take a listen.
Of supplementary acts on competition and consumer protection and the establishment of ERCA are, among other things, to promote, maintain, and encourage competition and enhance economic activity efficiently in production, trade, and consumers at regional level. To prohibit any anti-competitive business conduct that prevents, restricts, or distorts competition at the regional level.
The study has revealed the existence of competition and consumer protection issues, which include regulatory barriers for market entry, refusal to deal, lack of interoperability, false and misleading adverts, personal data and privacy issues.
Yes, we just heard there from Ibrahim Tambajang and Yasin Senghor. This is extremely important, isn't it? Because this is really the future, the digital economy. So by having this survey, this report, it helps planning, doesn't it?
Indeed, it is crucial because it's important to have a background check on how, a lot of things are happening in the country when it comes to consumer competition, because you have got a lot of players in the market. Now let's look at, let's say like the GSM market. You have got a lot of competitors, Conducting such research would help, the commission to understand, or the stakeholders to understand the relevant, the issues in the ground, because you are dealing with the consumers to some extent. There are a lot of things that are affecting the consumers out there, but with such surveys you can help to relate and find mechanisms to counter them to some extent. Like they mentioned the issue of fake publications and so forth. There are a lot of things happening in the background. So it's important. Does it match the quality that you are delivering? Let's say like you're giving a service and you claim that you're giving 100% when you're just giving 50%. So it's important, despite the fact that the consumer has got a right, a choice to deal with any competitor. It's like if you're not satisfied with this particular corporation, you can go to turn to another service to something. Because if you go to Pura, in most cases, that is what they tell you. If you are not satisfied with this particular service, there is high competition, you can turn to another one. But it's important as well, to have such things, to have a regulation to make sure that the market is not misused to some extent, because it's a capitalist market, and with a capitalist market, there is always high competition, and whenever there is high competition, quality is always undermined. So I think it's very important.
Not necessarily. It is actually when you have, in theory, it is about competition, but in practice, it may not be that, isn't it? That is why we need these regulatory bodies to make sure that they enforce what they call antitrust laws. There will be no cartels. So this is what our problem is, isn't it, in many ways. So you can have the regulation, you can have all the rules, but implementation in the end, that is where we really disappoint ourselves, isn't it?
Indeed, the implementation is a nightmare for the country to some extent. It's not only the consumer protection side, but there is a need to take urgent steps with such reports. Actually, you cannot just leave them hanging like that. If not, it's like it does not even have a use to some extent. There is a need to put it into effect. If not, it doesn't tell well. And it will also makes the consumers to be more vulnerable. Because you will not address their plight, obviously. So you will just conduct a survey like that and looked at it like that. So there's a need to take to show more commitment and take action towards the implementation of such studies to some extent.
Okay, thank you very much there, Usman. Now to our next story. The International Labour Organization's new director during the week met officials from GCCI. Let's just take a look at this one.
We understand the responsibilities in facilitating all the relationships and cooperation for many countries, Gambia included. But we have no doubt that this challenge will be supported by the team, particularly Julie, our very long-standing friend, partner, and sister to GCCI. So on that note, I believe, again, this is a very, very high welcome on behalf of the President of the Gambia Chamber of Commerce and the entire team.
Yes, there we just heard Sarata Konate, that's the CEO of GCCI. So this, what do they call it, decent work agenda, aimed at what? Improving labor standards and fostering sustainable economic development. Just as we said before, there are certain labor challenges that must be addressed, and this is here to help. Surely very important, especially in this country. People often say that we don't really enforce labor laws. So some employers taking advantage of this or taking advantage of that. Very, very significant, isn't it?
Indeed, quite crucial for the country and equally as well for GCCI. But I think when it comes to the issue of implementing labor laws, at times it's not only a question of its implementation, but also the level of awareness and education about people's, being conscious of their rights as employers to some extent is lacking in this country.
You mean employees, people who are
being conscious,
being conscious of their rights.
Yes, that is a major problem in this country, and I think it's something that should be taken seriously to some extent, because the only time you can complain or take the right steps to act on your rights, is when you understand, how, what laws are in place to help you to some extent. Because, like you said, people complain about being abused, exploited, at workplace. So I think it's very crucial. And it would help, a lot, because, with their interaction, I'm very sure they would exchange ideas on how to make sure that, they strengthen the awareness level, which is very important, because, without people being conscious of their rights, as employees to some extent, it may, hinder them to take the necessary action to make sure that they have a decent work atmosphere to some extent.
That's it, and such partnerships, imagine, between the ILO and GCCI, the Gambia Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So these partnerships are really very important, aren't they?
Indeed, it is important. It means that the GCCI is growing as an institution, and it will also help them to fight for the rights of their members, to make sure that the business community in the country, they are well educated, they are well informed about their rights, and what steps
and
they
even
could.
Job creation.
Yes, job
There's
creation.
something else to it. The rights here would also help in because the GCCI promotes entrepreneurship as well.
Indeed.
So they hope to widen the net of people employing themselves, so that helps in job creation.
Indeed, it is important. They are doing a lot on this aspect, and over the years, the country has witnessed a lot of entrepreneurs, and I think it's a win-win situation, and it's good for the country. Eventually, that is what every government yearns, every country yearns to have, to improve their production base, to have more producers, creative minds, which is crucial for our socio-economic development as a country.
That's it, and the fact that the new director, Samira Dawood, is in this country, surely her leadership would help strengthen this area, perhaps not just in the Gambia, perhaps in the whole West Africa, isn't it?
Indeed, it is crucial. Actually, it's like a bridge to some extent, to create more partnerships for the country and widen, the cooperation, like you mentioned.
Thank you very much there, Usman. Now to our penultimate story. We highlight a groundbreaking innovation in education for the first time ever in Africa, as it happens. The Digital Radio Mondial Consortium have successfully demonstrated a new program that delivers education via radio. Let's just listen.
Right now we've got the live signal here from UK, London. So and you should see the content that is on the radio that was also transmitted along with the audio, or is transmitted live right now.
With DRM education, it means that education can be delivered anywhere. No internet, no expensive data. I think we heard the students talk about the expense of data. But apart from that, apart from even the cost of data, if you think when there are rains or any disaster, the first things that go are television and mobile. You have no access whatsoever. Radio never goes down.
Fantastic point there. Radio never goes down. And incidentally, the lady there is Janet Darami, the very sister of our colleague Adedarami.
Indeed.
Fascinating there. That could be one of the ways that we deal with the challenges of limited internet access. And as you just said there, when it rains heavily, many things will go down, but radio goes on. Fantastic. And the penetration of radio in this country.
Yeah.
But, you know, and this is really, we are told, the first ever in Africa.
Indeed, it means the Gambia is on the right track in terms of tech, to make sure, like, embracing, you know, technology to some extent, you know, with such an initiative. I think it's important, you know, because it's important to have option B, to have plan B in place, you know, in case there are emergencies, you can easily turn to such options to make sure that you help. But more importantly, you know, that it is like been introduced into, you know, in the education sector, you know, trying to, you know, make sure that, you know, you enhance our education system. Imagine you are in Gambia, you can have access to, you know, lessons from England, you know, in the UK to some extent, you know. It's very important, you know. It will create that, you know, exchange of ideas, you know, and it's quite significant. I think it should be well commended.
That's it. So that was just a demonstration. So now it will be left to our ministers, isn't it, MOPSI or
embrace
whoever.
it more.
How can one integrate such technology? I'm sure there'll be a lot of work being done, but there are few steps to go.
Indeed, I think if the right resources are put in place, you know, this could be further enhanced, you know, further developed to make sure that, you know, we have more benefits like from it, not only limited to like the education sector, but we can also use it like in other areas, you know, like in agriculture, you know, in the health sector, you know. It could come with it could provide a lot of help for the country and in growth. You know, it means a lot to the country. I think it's quite significant.
Absolutely. Just imagine the number of people, especially in remote areas. That's really what the issue is. People in the urban, perhaps, you know, about the infrastructure is relatively much better than what's in the rural areas. So particularly tapping into that, into the rural, isn't it?
Indeed, it will create a balanced society to some extent, because like we're talking about access to internet to some extent, you know. Some areas have poor networks, you know. Having such systems in place would really go a long way in, you know, trying to create a balance to make sure that, you know, people also enjoy, you know, certain benefits. Because when a reporter informed me about this, I was like, how is that possible? You know, how can you operate a radio system without internet and so? But eventually, when I saw the demonstration, I was amazed. I was like, wow, this shows that technology has no barriers. Actually, it is just limitless to some extent. You know, the sky is the limit with technology.
That's it. So it's just a matter of integrating. You know, as we said earlier, the implementation.
Indeed.
When can one integrate these things into our system? Isn't it?
But I think we have got a good start, actually, for the fact that it has been successfully demonstrated at St. Joseph. I think, you know, we can, as a country or as a government, we can take it from there to some extent.
Thank you very much. And finally, a significant development in the field of journalism education in this country. UTG hosted a curriculum validation session focused on equipping future journalists with the tools to combat some of the biggest challenges in today's media: hate speech, disinformation, and the rise of artificial intelligence. Let's just take a look and listen.
As we bask in the opportunity that digital evolution presents, it is pertinent to brace the compelling challenges of building intelligence around the mix of the numerous variables. To my mind, we ought to systematize learning around interventions and schemes essential in equipping our students with the skills and knowledge to navigate these challenges so as to promote a culture of peace and respect for sustainability and development in the Gambia.
There we just had Professor Melchizedek J. Onobi, Dean of the University of Gambia School of Journalism. Absolutely, we need to systematize ways of combating these sort of modern toxic, you know, forms of communication now, or miscommunication, if you like. What do you make of it as a journalist?
Indeed, I think it's the right step that is taken, that is like trying to improve like the curriculum of the UTG, inviting students in particular, I think it's crucial, like the School of Journalism, because you have to start from with the people first. You sanitize their minds first before you can address the issue, profoundly to some extent. So I think it's a very crucial step taken by the UTG School of Journalism and Digital Media, like to upgrade their curriculum on these areas, that is like hate speech, disinformation, and AI to some extent, because people are using it, and you would wonder, a lot of citizen journalism is happening in this country. People would always, rely on things that are published online without properly being vetted, being verified to some extent. So what separates us like journalists and citizen journalists, it's the ethics, the professionalism, which is very important, in observing it to some extent, making sure that, you try to, balance, to do a lot of vetting, a lot of verification, which is very important. So having, exposing them to such tools and systems, I think it would help. It will go a long way. It will go a long way.
Absolutely. That is why I'm not comfortable with this so-called citizen journalism, because journalists, you are trained and there's a way that you handle material.
Sure.
Without the that training, I'm not sure whether I can call you a journalist, even though you are sharing information.
Yeah.
But whether I should call it journalism, I'm not so sure about that. But yes, it's important, AI-generated content. Journalists must really understand how to identify these things. It is so threatening, as it were.
Like I said in the beginning, like AI, one may argue that AI is not bad, but you need to be educated. You need to understand how to use AI for you to be able to like harness it to the fullest. But if you want to just use it like that without understanding your area to some extent, you may create more, hate speech, in fact, like more disinformation to some extent, because, you're solely relying on AI to get your information. And AI is just like AI, artificial intelligence, you cannot compare that to the human, processing, So I think it's important that like such an initiative, is encouraged to some extent, because, we live in a generation, where fake news is, the order of the day, disinformation and hate speech. And whenever these you have some information out there online or on the net to some extent, it shapes public discourse, and you don't know what it will bring to some extent. Somebody might just come across it and like, oh, this is what happened, but in reality, it could be, a different story. So
that's it. This is the danger we face, Mr. Jatta, because now people can use AI to sort of make up stories that seem so real.
Even with the voice, you can use somebody's voice and just create something else, just to create public nuisance to some extent.
Absolutely. Thank you very much there, Mr. Usman Jatta. We've come to the end of our program. Thank you very much, viewers. Until next time, I am Mumdu Moj. Goodbye.